These stories in today's video are meant to be true. It is up to you if you choose to believe them. Thank you for choosing this video to watch. I very much appreciate it. When I was a teenager, my mom loved buying antiques for cheap at thrift stores. She was admittingly a little too obsessed, and sometimes I didn't like the things she considered to buy or the things she brought home. I'm a Christian, and I also believe I may be just slightly in tune with the spirit realm, even though I desperately try to snuff it out because I don't like the things I've seen or heard in my childhood apartment. Sometimes the antiques gave off a really negative energy. I'd feel physically just creeped out, icky, nauseous, or tired, especially if we went to multiple thrift stores in a day. My mom bought these absolutely beautiful decorative crystal balls she put in a bowl as our table's centerpiece. Instead of wax fruits, she finds wax fruit tacky, but I never liked the way they made me feel. One night, after the purchase of these crystal decorations, I had the weirdest, most vivid dream that I was in New Orleans, about to go on a haunted house tour. I was at a cafe and talking to this black woman in a yellow dress and sun hat. She told me she was a psychic, and so was I. She told me it was a gift, but I had to be careful. She also warned me that once I went on the haunted house tour, that no one in my family should touch anything inside the house, or else we'll be haunted. So in the dream I go to the haunted house with my mother, father, and brother, and it was a lovely house. But before I could really explore, I hear a crash and my brother say, "Oops." I turn around and my brother had broken a vase near the house's entrance. The door was open, and I see the black woman walk by, and she gives me this knowing, haunted glare, like I had just made the worst mistake of my life. Then I woke up, but something was off. It was the middle of the night, because I could hear my mom snoring, pitch black, and there was something fuzzy on my nose. Somehow, even though last I checked it was bunched up and left hanging on some furniture before bed, my bathrobe had mysteriously been draped over the front of my person, completely flat and smooth, like a tarp over a dead body. I was scared to death and so confused. I complained to my parents, but they tried to talk me out of it being some sort of haunting. There were also some stereotypical events that happened soon after, like unexplained breathing, footsteps in the house instead of the ceiling. We live on the bottom floor. The next thing I remember is my mother and I talking. She was sitting in her lounging chair and suddenly she complained about a nasty smell. I told her I don't smell anything. And I kid you not, the minute I said that, I felt a movement, an energy leave my mother, and walk up to me, and sit on me. And I immediately smelled rotten eggs. My mom says she felt it walk away from her. She also complained that sometimes she thought Dad had come home and would be talking to her out of the corner of her eye, but he wouldn't be home. Things came to a head a few nights later. For context, we were getting up at around 6 a.m. that morning because my mom and brother need blood work done because they have an autoimmune diseases and they weren't leaving me home alone. But basically, me and my mom had this little ritual, where she'd try to wake me up, I'd mumble and complain and roll around in bed, she'd pull the sheet off, turn all the lights on, etc. It was kind of funny, and normally I was able to sneak in 5 more minutes of sleep. But this night, things were wrong. I was awoken from a dead sleep by a voice that sounded like my mother whispering, "Gee, it's time to get up." My mother never whispered. I never noticed that detail until afterwards, so I kinda mumbled and rolled over in my bed, never opening my eyes. And what happened next? Nothing. No lights turning on, no louder, "Come on G, it's time to wake up." No pulling my blanket forcefully away. Just breathing, like angry, huffy puffy breathing, like my mother was truly ready to be mad at me, ready to strangle me. Then footsteps stomping out the room. I was very confused by this reaction. I thought about it for a while. I wondered if she was going to leave me alone at home. So I checked the time. It was 3 a.m. I spent the rest of the night sleeping in my parents' room, and my dad performed an exorcism the next night. I had to turn a light on writing this. I still feel so chilled and sick recounting the events even now. But even after the exorcism, my mother complained about strange happenings, talking to my father when he wasn't home, smells, etc. So she decided it must be the crystal balls, and she picked them up to try to throw them away, and one quite literally flew out of her hand and landed on the floor. She claims it felt like someone snatched it out of her hand. But she still threw them out, despite the paranormal protest. Just to preface, this is a temporary account as I am in pure fear that somehow this person will track this back to me. I, 24M, live in a quiet neighborhood in a suburban town in Queensland, Australia with my roommate, 25F. We are childhood friends and are both finishing our studies at uni. The occurrences started around 2 months ago with the most recent update only last weekend. About 2 months ago, I cannot recall the actual date, I was lying in bed late at night watching a soccer game, drifting in and out of a sleep. I usually just use the background noise to help me fall asleep, as I would say I am a very nocturnal person. I feel like I was on the edge between being awake and asleep when I heard an urgent pounding on the front door. The way the house is shaped, my bedroom is approximately 10 meters from the front door and backs onto the front courtyard. The knock startled me at first, as I was unsure if it was just in my head, so I literally laid still in silence to see if I heard anything else. I knew it couldn't be my roommate, as she was out of town for the week visiting family and attending a wedding. Shortly after, there was a second knock just as hard, but no one yelled out or said anything. I'd like to say that I'm not easily scared and enjoy watching horror movies in my free time, but I found myself frozen in place, not able to move. No further knocks came, but I was too frightened to fall back asleep and didn't end up resting until around 4 a.m. I called my roommate in the morning, asking her if she knew anyone that could have come to our door in the night, but she was as confused as I was. A week passed by and I didn't really think much of it anymore. I sort of came to the conclusion that it was maybe someone drunk that mistaken our house as theirs, as it was a Saturday night when it happened. I work in a large chain grocery store, doing night stacking a few days a week, with my shifts ending between 2 to 4 a.m. usually. It was the next Saturday and I was approaching the end of my shift when my roommate texted me saying someone was knocking on the front door again. Even though I wasn't there, I was struck with same kind of fear I had experienced the week prior. She reassured me that the doors were all locked, but was scared knowing the same thing happened to me the week prior. She kept in touch with me until my shift was over and told me that there was no second knock. When I arrived home, the front yard seemed untouched and there was no one out walking the street. I must reinstate, it is a very quiet neighborhood with many elderly couple living on our street. In the morning, my roommate still seemed a bit shook up, so I put in an anonymous tip with a Crime Stopper service, but they never got back to me. Nothing else happened for the following month and a half. We were both going on with our lives like it never happened, but I stopped working Saturday nights, as this was the only similarity between the two occurrences. That was until the most recent Saturday. I was up late in the living room watching some old Black Mirror episodes, as the new season was about to come out. It was around 1 a.m. and I had plans to go to bed after the episode one was watching. For context, the lounge room is practically right next to the front door, with the path to the door going past a large window. As I was watching, I saw the outside motion sensor light turn on from the bottom of the windowsill under the blinds. I froze. Up until this point, I had completely forgotten about the knocking and I was stuck in fear. A short moment later, bang bang bang. At first I was just going to sit there and wait for them to go, but after a second loud knock, I decided to look through the peephole quietly to see if it was someone familiar. My roommate had a few failed relationships that didn't end on good terms, so I assumed maybe, just maybe, it could be one of them. It wasn't. It was a woman. She was staring at the front door, extremely still. It was like she was frozen. Her eyes staring straight ahead with little to no expression. It felt like she could see me through the eye hole, just staring into my soul. I couldn't move. She stood there for another 2 or so minutes until she looked to the side and ran off. I called the cops and explained on the phone what had happened, and they sent someone out shortly later. They checked the cars parked on the street but came up empty-handed, as there was no damage, and told me to call back if anything happened again. The thing that I couldn't get out of my head was the way she stood there emotionless, staring straight ahead, and the way she ran off. She looked to be in her mid-30s, maybe 40, but was wearing a small nightdress and no shoes. Not only was this out of the ordinary, but it was freezing outside. Since then I have ordered one of those doorbell cameras in case she does come back, but to be completely honest, I flinch whenever someone knocks on that door now. Thank you for the great support, I really do appreciate it. If you are enjoying what I'm doing, why not think about subscribing to my channel? It is free and would help me a great deal. I must have only been about 4 or 5 when I encountered the creatures in my room. I still had a toddler bed, not quite a single, the one that is converted from a large cot. It was low to the ground because I was prone to rolling out in my sleep. Near the foot of the bed, against the wall, there was a big red toy box made of plastic, in the shape of a treasure chest. The chest was crammed full of toys, mostly little figures of cartoons I'd watch: Street Sharks, He-Man, Thundercats, biker mice from Mars, a few Pokemon figures but mostly action men. I had a night light, a little plug-in one at the side the headboard, in the shape of a crescent moon. It glowed a faint orange that stayed on throughout the night. My mum always left my door ajar a little. We had a street light situated right outside the hallway window. It shone a strip of white light onto my wall. The toy box was next to the door. It was a small room, but the door just missed the sides of the box when you opened it, as if it had been purposefully built for the space. I was awakened by the sound of cracking and squeaking, the noise a dog makes when chewing a plastic ball. Small bumps and thuds came from the foot of my bed. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, mouth agape, still practically asleep. I sat and listened for a few seconds. The sound of rustling, things being clanged together, snapping and gnawing crept over my footboard. As well as the constant clatter, I could make out faint squeaking, very low and quiet, but it was there, more like that of a guinea pig than a mouse. But something was different about it. At the end, instead of rising higher, the tone dropped into a small growl. Slowly, I raised myself onto my hands and knees and crept forward to the bottom of the bed. This side of the room was dark. The nightlight's measly orange glow didn't reach past the bed. I peered over the footboard at the toy box. The lid was open, which was strange, and toys littered the floor. I watched as the noises came from inside the box. Something was moving, but amongst the figures, I couldn't tell what it was. An action man came tumbling out onto the floor. One of the flippers it was wearing had been shredded. The other leg stopped in a mangled stump halfway down. Examining the other toys on the carpet, all of them had bite marks, limbs missing or faces chewed into deformed plastic mush. Little hands, arms and bits of chewed up parts were scattered on the floor also. Bewildered, I raised myself up and leaned forward, trying to get a better look inside the chest. At first, I still couldn't distinguish what was moving. Letting my eyes focus, I made out something furry. At first, I thought it might be the Furby I had in there, but whatever it was had its back to me, hunched over. Its fur looked damp and spiked up in messy clumps. A long, thin tail, covered in small hairs, slithered upright, the end twitching from side to side. I noticed something else move within the chest and, scanning the whole thing, I could make out two more tails, both different sizes, one longer, one shorter, protruding from deeper inside the mound of toys. I'm not really sure why, but whatever they were, I didn't want to be in the room with them. They scared me. Slowly, I crept from my bed and tiptoed towards the door. Reaching it, as it wasn't far, I placed a hand on it, still looking at the box, still watching the tails flicker. I cautiously opened the door. Silently, it swung open. At first, the white stripe of light from the hallway grew as the exit out of the room grew larger. Even though I'd done it countless times, I slowed down once the door moved closer to the edge of the toy box, intently watching the distance between the two. As I slowed, the hinges of the door creaked loudly, making me jump. I froze on the spot. I listened out for the sounds of movement, but there was none. The chewing, the snapping, the gnawing, they'd all stopped. Turning my head, I peered at the toy box. I was met with two whitish yellow eyes. They reflected the light of the crescent moon and the hallway. They didn't seem to look directly at me, more off to my right, at the door. A nose, wrinkled and leathery, twitched as the two long slits extended and retracted. A slow, wheezing breath escaped as a mouth began to open. It grew wider and wider, taking over most of the face. Incredibly sharp, needle-like teeth dripped with saliva. Bits of plastic and fake hair had been impaled and wedged in between them. There seemed to be no pattern to them, they just protruded outwards or downwards, in all forms of thickness as size. What looked like horns, or ears, I couldn't really tell, protruded from atop the head and around the eyes, as if the eyelids stretched into a pointed, contorted spike. The creature didn't move, neither did I. Slowly, and with very little noise, toys were pushed out of the way and two more heads arose from the medley. All staring in the direction of the door, all white and yellow-eyed, like pools of molding milk. My heart drummed on my chest. Tears accumulated in the corner of my eyes. The creatures were different sizes, from a very small one to one the size of maybe a large rabbit. This one opened its mouth wider than the other and let out that squeak I'd heard before. It was just air at first, a whisper, which rose into a muted squeak that lasted a second or two, then dropped dramatically into a low grumble, maybe a growl. This snapped me from my frozen state and I swung the door open as quick as I could and bolted down the hall. I could hear the patter of claws on the laminate flooring behind me. A sensation rose from within my stomach, like a hot burst that flowed through my body. I remember wailing as I ran, feeling the tears stream down my face. My mother's room was at the other end of the hallway, closest to the window. I ran past my brother's room, his door was closed, past the open toilet door and slammed into my mother's. The pitter-patter on the laminate changed to thuds on carpet. My mother's bed was one of those Ottoman ones, so it was very high off the floor. Before I reached it I leapt, slamming into the side. Kicking my legs and grabbing handfuls of duvet, I pulled myself up. A pain shot up my left leg, from just above my anca. I cried out and my mum spun round to face me. "What's up, babe?" she murmured, pulling me onto the bed. "There's monsters in my room," I said through tears and shaky breaths. "It's just a bad dream, little man." She pulled me close and cuddled me up under the thick feather-down duvet. I cried for a while, but the lulling and stroking of the hair my mum did sent me off to sleep. The next morning, I'd pretty much forgot about what happened and, being influenced by my mum's comments, put what I could remember down to a nightmare. Getting up from the bed, before my mum had awoke, I headed back to my room. The door was open wide and from the hallway I could see the top of the toy box open. Creeping to the doorway, parts of toys still littered the floor. But there was no sounds. It was deathly quiet. I flicked the main light on and scanned the room, nothing. I knew my mum wouldn't believe me if I told her what had happened, so instead, I picked up all the bits of toys and put them back in the chest. Once I'd tidied up I walked back into the hallway and headed for the bathroom. I climbed onto the step next to the toilet and pulled down my pajama panta and nighttime nappy and had a wee. My hand brushed past the bottom of my leg when I pulled my pants back up and I winced. Contorting my back, I turned and looked down at my leg. There, at the bottom, was a long, bloodied, red mark. I told my mum when she woke up and she said I must have caught it on the bed or the toy box during the night. For a long time I'd forgotten about that memory. Until, 26 or so years later, whilst in bed with my wife, my 3-year-old daughter came running into my room in the middle of the night saying there were monsters in her room with big white eyes. The memories flooded back to me. I haven't been able to find any other story like it, so, out of desperation, I thought I'd put it on here and see what others say. A repressed memory of a bad dream and a coincidence from a 3-year-old? Or a childhood memory long forgotten, unlocked by a second encounter?